Aloha, my name is Jim Sequeria, and I am with Eric K. and Phil Berlin. These two brothers, they did a Sankofa journey. And so that's what we'd like to hear from them. They're going to share with us. For those that have never heard of Sankofa or aren't sure exactly what is Sankofa, would you explain or share a little bit about what Sankofa is all about?
Sankofa, I think it comes from a word that means to look back. And it's the intention is to look back on what has brought us to where we are today, specifically around issues of civil rights. Sankofa takes place in the South, and we traveled around and looked at civil rights sites that were significant. And so it's a trip where we go and we get on a bus and we go along with a partner. So I got to go along with my friend here, Phil Berlin. I think we went through 5 states in the process and 800 miles. We processed everything we saw together. And it was really, really fun to not only get to know Phil better, but to dive into these really deep and serious topics together.
Thanks, Eric. And you brought up sites. Phil, can you share with us some of the sites that you guys experienced together?
It was almost like walking through the life of Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
We started in Atlanta, looked at his, the house where he was born in, the area surrounding the schools and the church that he pastored and the like, and then worked our way to Alabama. Spent days there, talked about again the civil rights movement, and then ended the time in Memphis, Lorraine Motel, where he was murdered. For me, it was just really impactful. It was cool getting to see places for the first time that I've read a lot about, that I've looked at pictures of, but I've never actually been to. So it was really cool to kind of just be in those moments.
One of the things about Sankofa but one of the intentional ways they partnered people is to partner an African American person with a Euro American person. And so I want to just hear your experiences.
So just being able to walking across the Etna's Pettus Bridge and just getting to see firsthand a lot of the history was just real impactful for me. And so there was a couple of ways that it was impactful. First off, like I said, the emotional part of just seeing these things for the first time. And then, having to share these experiences with someone of a different race. Yeah, I want us to get closer together through looking at this history, but this was heavy history. And then to be in those places, I was taken aback very often and kind of had to distance myself from Eric for a minute and then come back around and have our conversations.
And maybe, Phil, can you maybe go into a little bit more, maybe depth?
Yeah, first, the biggest one is anger. Just simply anger that this here history has been experienced, and just the repercussions of this history is still being affected. So we're talking about 1960s. We're not talking about that long ago. Throughout the journey, we had people that were there during this time in the civil rights movement that were able to share with us. And then just the weight of how normal all this stuff was. Lynching, and just the reason why we had to go through the civil rights movement. This history is still apparent and still being experienced in many regards. It really makes me question whether or not we know how to live in an America and in a church without this kind of stuff. There's so much of the repercussion that's still impacting us.
Eric, I mean, for obvious reasons, it was a totally different experience for you. And what were some of the emotions that you were feeling?
Well, it was certainly educational. I learned a ton. And I kind of felt like every site we went to kind of told us the story again, over and over again. And like hearing it over and over again and picking up new details here and there, it really kind of locked into place for me what had happened. And all the way from slavery to the post-slavery time when the rights that were gained during slavery were then lost again pretty quickly. And then the in between time, all about the lynchings and stuff. Of course, I knew about lynchings, but I think one of the most significant moments for me was visiting the National Memorial there in Montgomery, Alabama. Seeing those metal structures, one for every county where a lynching took place, it just was really heavy. How could we possibly let this happen? And also, the very last day when we were in Memphis and we visited the Lorraine Hotel, we learned all about Martin Luther King through the whole process. I felt like I got to him so well. And I did not expect this, but walking through the room where he stayed and looking at the balcony where he was shot, I was surprised at what an emotional moment that was for me as well. Like,
You said there's an emotional moment for you at that. How would you explain that?
I can't necessarily name what the emotion was. It was sadness and grief for sure. It was also a moment of like being inspired by the life of Martin Luther King, frustration and like Phil said, anger that the world is such that brought about the need for him to be a civil rights leader, and then that he was murdered. I mean, all of it. It was all there, all at the same time.
What did you learn from each other?
First off, Eric is an incredible representative of the conference and the denomination.
Thank
On
you.
this trip, there are several people that are wrestling with the things that we're seeing, and then they have their own questions about our denomination. And I watched Eric, while wrestling with the emotions that he's having, answer questions about the denomination. Seeing him have those moments where he's just saddened by the history. For me, I felt at moments I was becoming more hardened to it. I would see something that would reaffirm what I would understand about racism in America, and I would become more angry and would not allow that shell to be broken. And
Mhm.
then still look over at my brother and say, he's still processing this. I don't want to engage with him in processing this because I'm done processing this. I don't want to talk about this anymore. But this reaffirmed that as a brother in Christ, we don't walk through these journeys on our own. And he's not walking through this journey on his own because I'm there. And the anger and the like I'm feeling, he's not allowing me to walk on my own because he's now softened to it. I need to be softer to it and have a conversation about what's going on. So I felt that we learned from one another. So
Thanks, Phil. How about you, Eric?
Not only was it just a blast to be with Phil because he's a really good friend and he's a fun guy to be around, Phil has done a significant amount of study around the life of Martin Luther King and writing and such. And I was blessed to be able to just hear from his enormous amount of knowledge and wisdom around all these things throughout the entire trip. I just felt like I got to have my own private tour guide.
when we go through an experience like this, it's about considering how racism lives in here. It's not that the boogeyman is out there anywhere, it lives right here. So I have to continue to root out how it impacts my life, how it impacts how I see people. And I think that's one of the most important things that comes out of a journey like this is that we do a lot of introspection to say, okay, what am I going to change about me because I've now learned the things that I've learned and seen the things that I've seen.
These immersive experiences like Sankofa, Journey to Mosaic, are so important in a time like this is because there is this move to remove the stories, the BIPOC stories, to kind of, if you will, whitewash them as if they've never happened. And so I think your voices, and I appreciate, your voice and what you're sharing. And what have you brought back?
One is the I'm really encouraged by renewed friendship with Phil. I'm really looking forward to connecting with him. And we talked about getting our wives and us together for dinner and such. So I'm looking forward to making that happen. So
I'm free for dinner too. I mean, when you guys get together, I mean,
that's there's a real practical element. We have our youth journey to Mosaic coming up this summer. And even though it's very different than Sankofa, there's so much here that I'll be able to take into that and just be able to bring as a pastoral presence at that event, but also in our planning. But I think for me personally, it really has elevated my awareness of what's going on in the world right now, and it's activated me to be ready to move and act.
I think the biggest thing for me is the re-engagement with the conference and the covenant as a whole. It's been a little more than a year since we did, yeah, a little more than a year since we did the last Journey Mosaic out in this area. And honestly, until the end of Journey Mosaic, my heart is really open to being more engaged with the conference and the covenant and just kind of continuing this work. We all need to process this stuff and think through it together and kind of determine how it going to shape and form kind of the direction of the church. Journey to Mosaic or Sankofa, I think every Christian should go on one of these journeys to have this form of conversation in this structure, to be able to process some of this stuff.
I just want to say thanks to our conference, our executive board, our superintendent Greg Yee, who encouraged and supported me to come and for Phil and I, and so we couldn't have done it without their support. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. So my final thought is I just want to add we also have Weaving Justice, which is another immersive experience here in the Northwest. And so if you want to hear more about that, you can contact me or the conference office. Again, you guys, thank you so much. It's a great time being with you. I'll just sit and wait for the phone call when we're all going out for dinner.